Commander Zefak stood at the observation deck of the Galactic Coalition battleship Sovereign Dawn, watching the blue-green marble of Earth grow larger in the viewport. His four arms crossed behind his back in the traditional Kytherian military stance, while his silver-scaled skin reflected the distant starlight. The vertical slits that served as his nostrils flared slightly as he processed the recycled ship air, a bland mixture of oxygen, nitrogen, and purification chemicals that had sustained him for the past 6 months of deep space travel. The war with the Devourers had been raging for 3 standard galactic years, and Earth represented humanity's final stronghold. Intelligence reports painted a grim picture of the human species, technologically inferior, physically weak compared to most coalition races, and hopelessly outnumbered. Yet somehow, they had held their ground longer than anyone expected. Zefak's mission was simple: establish a forward operating base on Earth's surface and coordinate with human military leaders to plan what would likely be humanity's last stand. Zefak's homeworld of Kyther Prime had been among the first to fall to the Devourers. His people, the Kytherians, were renowned throughout the galaxy for their disciplined military structure and their incredibly efficient metabolism. They could survive on processed nutrient cubes for months without any degradation in physical or mental performance. Their digestive system was a marvel of biological engineering, capable of extracting maximum nutritional value from even the most basic synthetic compounds. Commander came the metallic voice of his aide, Lieutenant Vex, through the ship's communication system. We're receiving docking clearance from Earth Station Alpha. Human representatives are requesting a preliminary meeting before planetfall. Zefak's mandibles clicked twice, the Kytherian equivalent of a nod. Acknowledge their request. Prepare my formal diplomatic gear and a 2-day supply of standard rations. As he made his way to the docking bay, Zefak reflected on what little he knew about human culture. The Coalition's xenobiology database contained basic information about their species. They were carbon-based, required regular intake of complex organic compounds, and had an unusually varied diet compared to most spacefaring civilizations. Most civilized species had long ago moved beyond the primitive practice of consuming unprocessed organic matter, but humans apparently still engaged in this behavior regularly. The docking procedure went smoothly, and within an hour, Zefak found himself in a sterile meeting room aboard Earth Station Alpha, facing 3 human representatives. General Patricia Morrison, a graying woman with sharp eyes and numerous military decorations, sat across from him. To her left was Dr. Sarah Chun, a xenobiologist whose role was apparently to facilitate communication between species. On the right sat Captain Michael Rodriguez, whose weathered face spoke of years in combat. Commander Zefak, General Morrison began, her voice steady despite the dire circumstances. We appreciate the Coalition's continued support. Our situation is challenging. Zefak's translation implant processed her words, adding subtle contextual notes about human emotional undertones. These creatures seemed remarkably composed, considering their species faced extinction. General Morrison, the Coalition recognizes humanity's unexpected resilience. My forces are prepared to establish planetary operations immediately. Dr. Chen leaned forward, her eyes studying Zefak with scientific curiosity. Commander, before we proceed with military planning, we'd like to address some practical concerns. Our intelligence suggests that Coalition forces typically sustain themselves on synthetic rations. While we can provide compatible nutritional compounds, we're also hoping you might consider sampling local provisions. Cultural exchange, even in wartime, often strengthens alliances. Zefak's inner eyelids blinked, a sign of confusion among his people. Doctor, are you suggesting consumption of unprocessed organic matter? Captain Rodriguez chuckled, the sound strange to Kytherian ears. Commander, we call it food. And yes, we think you might find it interesting. The concept seemed absurd to Zefak. Why would an advanced military commander waste time and energy processing crude organic compounds when perfectly efficient synthetic nutrition was available? But Diplomacy required certain concessions, and if consuming primitive sustenance would strengthen the alliance, he could endure the inconvenience. "I am willing to participate in your cultural practices," Zefak replied formally. "However, I must warn you that Kytherian digestive systems are highly specialized. We may not be compatible with your food." Dr. Chen's eyes brightened. "Actually, Commander, our preliminary scans suggest remarkable compatibility. The Kytherian digestive system appears more versatile than your medical databases indicate. We believe you could not only process human food, but might find it quite effective." 2 hours later, Zefak found himself in what the humans called a restaurant in the station's civilian quarter. The concept was foreign to him, an entire facility dedicated solely to the preparation and consumption of organic matter. The establishment was called Fusion, and, according to Captain Rodriguez, it specialized in combining Earth's various cultural food traditions. The interior was unlike anything in Zefak's experience. Soft lighting created an atmosphere that his tactical training identified as deliberately non-threatening. The air carried complex aromatic compounds that his enhanced senses detected but couldn't categorize. Humans sat at small tables, engaged in social interaction while consuming various organic preparations. Their behavior suggested this was pleasurable rather than merely functional. Chef Elena Vasquez, a small human female with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands, approached their table. Her manner was respectful, but noticeably less formal than the military personnel. "Commander Zefak, it's an honor to meet you. I've prepared a special tasting menu, small portions of different Earth cuisines, to help you experience our culinary diversity." Zefak settled his considerable frame into a reinforced chair, all four arms positioned formally. "I appreciate your efforts, Chef Vasquez. Please proceed with your demonstration." The first course arrived on a simple white ceramic plate. Chef Vasquez explained, "This is bruschetta, toasted bread topped with fresh tomatoes, basil, garlic, and olive oil. It's from Earth's Mediterranean region, specifically Italy." Zefak examined the offering with scientific curiosity. The bread appeared to be processed grain matter, while the red substance was clearly plant tissue. The green leaves were obviously vegetation, and the liquid coating seemed to be extracted plant oils. His training had prepared him to consume various emergency rations, including some organic compounds, but nothing quite like this. Using his primary eating appendage, a specialized finger with built-in cutting surfaces, Zefak carefully sectioned a small portion and placed it in his mouth. His advanced palate immediately began analyzing the chemical composition: complex carbohydrates, plant acids, aromatic compounds, mineral traces. But something unexpected happened. Instead of the neutral processing experience he expected, Zefak's nervous system registered pleasure. The sensation was unlike anything in his previous experience. The combination of textures, crispy bread, soft tomato, smooth oil, created a symphony of tactile input. The flavors seemed to dance across his palate, each component distinct yet harmoniously combined. His silver scales rippled involuntarily, a physiological response that hadn't occurred since his adolescence on Kyther Prime. Dr. Chun, who had been monitoring his vital signs with a discreet scanner, looked surprised. "Commander, are you experiencing any discomfort?" Zefak paused, trying to process what was happening to him. "No discomfort, Doctor. The experience is unusual. The organic matter seems to be triggering unexpected neural responses." Chef Vasquez smiled knowingly. "That's called enjoying your food, Commander. Would you like to try the next course?" The second dish was described as sushi, raw fish prepared according to Japanese traditions, served with fermented soybean paste and fiery green plant extract called wasabi. Zefak approached it with increased caution, but also with growing curiosity. The previous item had challenged his understanding of nutrition as purely functional. When he consumed the sushi, the effect was even more pronounced. The raw fish provided clean protein that his system processed efficiently, but the wasabi created a sensation that his translator couldn't adequately describe. It was simultaneously painful and pleasurable, causing his respiratory systems to react in ways that made the humans around him smile. "The wasabi is quite strong," Captain Rodriguez observed. "Even most humans find it intense." But Zefak was experiencing something far beyond intensity. Each bite seemed to unlock new sensory pathways he never knew existed. His military training had taught him to suppress unnecessary sensations and focus on function over form. Yet this food was demonstrating that the line between necessity and pleasure might be more complex than Kytherian philosophy acknowledged. The third course pushed his experience even further into uncharted territory. Chef Vasquez presented what she called chocolate lava cake, a dessert that combined multiple earth compounds into something that defied Zefak's understanding of nutrition entirely. The exterior was a processed grain and sugar matrix, while the interior contained a flowing substance made from cacao plant derivatives and dairy animal secretions. When the warm, liquid chocolate touched his palate, Zefak's entire nervous system seemed to light up. The sensation was so intense that his secondary arms trembled involuntarily. His scales shifted from silver to a deeper, more iridescent hue, a physiological response that typically only occurred during deep meditation or profound emotional experiences. "Commander, your vital signs are spiking," Dr. Chen said with concern. "Should we stop the demonstration?" But Zefak couldn't respond immediately. He was experiencing what he could only describe as a fundamental shift in consciousness. The chocolate seemed to trigger not just pleasure centers in his brain, but to activate neural pathways associated with memory, emotion, and even spiritual contemplation. For a moment, he was transported back to his childhood on Kyther Prime, experiencing emotions he had trained himself to suppress for decades. "This is unprecedented," he finally managed to say. "How do humans function while experiencing such intense sensory input?" Chef Vasquez laughed gently. "We've had thousands of years to get used to it, Commander. Food isn't just fuel for us. It's culture, memory, art, and love all combined into something we can share." The concept was revolutionary to Zefak. His people viewed eating as a necessary but purely functional activity, like refueling a spacecraft or charging a weapon. The idea that consuming nutrients could be simultaneously necessary and transcendent challenged fundamental assumptions about efficiency and purpose. As the tasting continued with dishes from various Earth cultures, spicy Thai curry that made his scales glow with internal heat, delicate French pastries that seemed to dissolve into pure pleasure, robust Mexican mole that combined dozens of plant compounds into something greater than the sum of its parts, Zefak found his worldview fundamentally shifting. Each bite seemed to unlock new sensory capabilities he never knew he possessed. His enhanced Kytherian metabolism wasn't just processing these compounds efficiently. It was amplifying every sensation, every flavor, every texture into an experience that bordered on the mystical. By the time the tasting concluded, Zefak felt as though he had undergone a profound transformation. His understanding of nutrition, pleasure, culture, and even military efficiency had been challenged and expanded. The humans around him watched with fascination as the scales continued to shift through subtle color variations, a visible sign of the internal revolution occurring within his consciousness. "Chef Vasquez," he said formally, though his voice carried new emotional undertones, "this experience has been educational. I believe I understand now why humans have fought so fiercely to protect their world." Dr. Chun looked intrigued. "Commander, how do you feel physically? Any adverse reactions to the alien compounds?" Zefak considered the question carefully. Physically, he felt better than he had in months. His energy levels were actually higher than they typically were after consuming standard rations. His mental clarity was enhanced, and his combat readiness indicators were all showing green. But beyond the physical improvements, something more fundamental had changed. "Doctor, I believe my people may have overlooked certain aspects of nutrition. This food appears to provide benefits beyond mere sustenance. General Morrison leaned forward with interest. Commander, are you saying these meals actually improved your combat effectiveness? In ways I'm still processing, General. But, yes, I feel more alert, more capable, and more connected to the mission than I have since leaving Kyther Prime. As they prepared to depart for Earth's surface, Zefak found himself looking forward to the next meal in a way that would have been incomprehensible to him just hours earlier. The war against the Devourers remained as desperate as ever, but he now understood that humans weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to preserve something beautiful and complex that he was only beginning to comprehend. The transport shuttle was loaded with standard coalition rations for his troops, but Zefak had made an unusual request, a small selection of human food items for his personal consumption. As they descended toward Earth's surface, he reflected on how a simple meal had challenged everything he thought he knew about efficiency, purpose, and what it truly meant to be alive. Little did he know that this was only the beginning of his transformation, and that the simple act of sharing a meal with humans would ultimately change not just his own understanding of existence, but the entire course of the war itself. The forward operating base that Zefak established in the ruins of what humans called Denver was unlike any military installation he had commanded before. Standard coalition protocol demanded sterile efficiency, prefabricated structures, regulated atmospheric conditions, and centralized distribution of synthetic rations. But something had changed in Zefak since his experience aboard Earth Station Alpha, and his decisions reflected this transformation. Instead of the typical isolated compound, Zefak had integrated his base with a surviving human settlement. Coalition engineers worked alongside human construction crews to rebuild defensive positions, while Kytherian soldiers shared patrol duties with human militia. Most surprisingly, the base's mess hall had been designed as a joint facility where both species could eat together. Lieutenant Vex found this arrangement deeply disturbing. Commander, with respect, this integration violates 17 different coalition security protocols. Our troops are exposed to unnecessary risks, and the inefficiency of accommodating human nutritional requirements is affecting our operational readiness. Zefak stood in his command center, reviewing tactical displays that showed Devourer Scout ships probing the outer edges of Earth's solar system. His scales had maintained a subtle iridescent quality ever since his first encounter with human food, and his aide had noticed other changes as well. Enhanced reflexes, improved decision-making speed, and an unusual level of creative tactical thinking. Lieutenant, our inefficient integration has produced measurable improvements in intelligence gathering, defensive coordination, and troop morale. The humans' local knowledge has prevented 3 potential ambush scenarios that our sensors failed to detect. Vex's mandibles clicked in disapproval. Sir, these benefits could be achieved through standard liaison protocols. The food sharing in particular serves no tactical purpose. But Zefak knew better. Over the past week, he had continued exploring human cuisine under the guidance of Maria Santos, a former chef who now served as the settlement's logistics coordinator. Each meal had been a revelation that challenged fundamental assumptions about efficiency and performance. The previous evening, Maria had introduced him to something called barbecue, meat prepared using controlled combustion and complex seasoning blends. The process seemed absurdly inefficient compared to standard protein synthesis, yet the results had triggered neural responses that lasted for hours. His strategic thinking during the night shift had reached levels of clarity and innovation that impressed even his own staff. Vex, I'm ordering you to participate in tonight's meal sharing with the humans. Consider it a reconnaissance mission. His aide's silver scales rippled with discomfort. Sir, is that wise? Kytherian physiology may not react well to primitive organic compounds. That's exactly what I thought, Zefak replied, remembering his own resistance just days earlier. Report to the mess hall at 1800 hours. That's an order. The joint mess hall was a converted warehouse that somehow felt more welcoming than the sterile perfection of typical coalition facilities. Human families sat alongside Kytherian soldiers, sharing tables and conversation despite the language barriers. Children played between the tables while their parents discussed defensive strategies with alien warriors who stood twice their height. ZFAC arrived to find Maria Santos coordinating with Sergeant Kim Park, one of his most experienced non-commissioned officers. Sergeant Park had initially been assigned to mess security, but had somehow become fascinated with human food preparation techniques. "Commander," Sergeant Park reported, "the human Maria has been teaching me about seasoning. The process appears to be inefficient, but the results enhance protein uptake and improve cognitive function in ways our nutritional science cannot explain." Maria smiled at the formal military language. "Sergeant Park is a natural cook, Commander. He's been experimenting with Kytherian flavor preferences and creating fusion dishes that work for both our species." The evening's menu reflected this collaboration. Traditional human dishes modified to accommodate Kytherian nutritional needs, alongside completely new creations that neither species had imagined before. ZFAC selected items recommended by Sergeant Park, trusting his subordinates' newfound expertise. The first dish was described as Korean Kytherian fusion, fermented vegetables prepared in the style of kimchi, but using mineral-rich plants from Kyther Prime's orbital gardens. The fermentation process had been adapted to produce compounds that specifically enhanced Kytherian neural function while maintaining the complex flavor profiles that humans enjoyed. When ZFAC consumed the modified kimchi, the effect was immediate and profound. His enhanced metabolism processed the fermented compounds into neurotransmitter precursors that flooded his system with clarity and energy. But more than the biochemical effects, the flavor itself seemed to trigger memories of home while simultaneously creating new associations with Earth and humanity. Lieutenant Vex approached his table reluctantly, carrying a plate that contained what appeared to be standard coalition rations. "Commander, I brought approved nutritional supplements." "Negative, Lieutenant. You'll be trying the human preparations." "Maria, would you recommend something suitable for a first-time experience?" Maria studied Vex with the same careful attention she had given ZFAC during his introduction to human cuisine. "I think we'll start with something simple but memorable. Sergeant Park, could you bring a portion of the beef stew?" The stew was a revelation in slow-cooked complexity, meat that had been heated for hours until it achieved a texture unknown in synthetic proteins, vegetables that had absorbed the essence of the cooking liquid, and seasonings that created a harmony of flavors greater than any individual component. Vex approached the dish with scientific curiosity, analyzing its composition with his enhanced senses before carefully consuming a small portion. His reaction was immediate and visible. His scales shifted from silver to a warmer, bronze tone, and his rigid military posture relaxed slightly. "This is unexpected," Vex admitted. "The protein structure is completely different from synthesized alternatives. How do the humans achieve such complex molecular arrangements without industrial equipment?" "Time and patience," Maria explained. "This stew has been cooking for 8 hours. The slow process breaks down the proteins naturally and allows the flavors to develop in ways that rapid synthesis cannot replicate." As Vex continued eating, his transformation became more pronounced. His analytical mind, trained for tactical efficiency, began to appreciate the artistry involved in the food's preparation. Each spoonful seemed to unlock new sensory pathways, and his comments shifted from clinical observations to genuine appreciation. "The thermal processing creates protein chains that deliver sustained energy release," he observed. "But beyond the nutritional efficiency, there's something aesthetically pleasing about the process itself." ZFAC watched his aide's reaction with satisfaction. The same revolutionary experience that had changed his own perspective was now affecting Vex, and, through him, would likely spread throughout the Kytherian forces on Earth. But the evening's real surprise came when Dr. Chun arrived with preliminary results from her ongoing study of Kytherian dietary responses. She approached ZFAC's table with a data pad and, an expression of scientific excitement. Commander, the results are extraordinary. Your troops who have been participating in human meals show significant improvements across all measurable performance indicators. Reaction times are faster, strategic thinking is more creative, and physical endurance has increased by an average of 12%. Zefak's inner eyelids blinked in surprise. Doctor, are you suggesting that human food is actually superior to coalition rations? Not superior in terms of basic nutrition, Dr. Chen clarified. But human food provides something that synthetic rations lack: complexity. Your digestive systems aren't just processing nutrients, they're processing information. The variety of compounds, the natural flavor combinations, the textural diversity, it all contributes to enhanced neural development. The implications were staggering. For centuries, coalition species had assumed that efficient nutrition meant simplified nutrition. The idea that complexity itself might be a nutritional requirement challenged fundamental assumptions about military logistics, resource allocation, and biological optimization. Sergeant Park overheard the conversation and approached with his own observations. Commander, permission to speak freely about my experiences with human food preparation? Granted, Sergeant. Sir, the process of creating these meals requires problem-solving skills that enhance tactical thinking. When I'm adapting a human recipe for Kytherian needs, I'm essentially running complex optimization algorithms in real time. The mental exercises involved in cooking are similar to combat scenario planning. Maria nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly right, Sergeant. Cooking is creative problem-solving under constraints, limited ingredients, time pressure, multiple variables to balance. It's like tactical planning, but for flavor instead of warfare. Zefak felt pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. Human resistance hadn't been solely due to desperation or stubbornness. It was enhanced by their approach to life itself. They treated every aspect of existence, even basic nutrition, as an opportunity for creativity, connection, and growth. As the evening progressed, more Kytherian soldiers joined the experimental dining, guided by their human counterparts through increasingly complex culinary experiences. The mess hall filled with sounds unlike any military facility Zefak had ever commanded. Laughter, animated discussion, and the satisfied clicks and chirps that Kytherians made when experiencing genuine pleasure. Lieutenant Vex returned to Zefak's table, carrying a dessert that Maria had recommended, something called apple pie with vanilla ice cream. His entire demeanor had changed over the course of the meal, and his scales now displayed a warm, golden hue that indicated deep contentment. Commander, Vex said quietly, I believe I owe you an apology. I was wrong to question your integration policies. This experience has been transformative. But their conversation was interrupted by urgent alerts from the command center. Devourer advanced scouts had been detected in the outer asteroid belt, moving faster than intelligence had predicted. The enemy would arrive within 72 hours. As Zefak rushed to his command center, his mind felt sharper and more focused than it had since the war began. The human food hadn't just improved his physical capabilities. It had enhanced his capacity for innovation and creative problem-solving. For the first time since Earth's siege began, he felt confident that they could devise strategies the enemy wouldn't anticipate. The command center buzzed with activity as staff officers analyzed enemy movements and updated defensive plans. But Zefak found himself thinking beyond conventional tactics. The humans had shown him that apparent inefficiency could mask hidden advantages. Perhaps the same principle could be applied to military strategy. All senior staff, report for immediate planning session, he ordered. And, Sergeant Park, I want you to prepare high-energy meals for the entire command staff. We're going to need enhanced cognitive function for what I have in mind. As his officers assembled, Zefak realized that the war was about to enter a new phase. The Devourers expected to face a weakened, desperate enemy using predictable defensive tactics. Instead, they would encounter forces enhanced by an understanding of complexity, creativity, and connection that the enemy couldn't comprehend. The next 72 hours would determine not just Earth's survival, but whether the galaxy would learn that true strength came not from efficient simplicity, but from embracing the beautiful complexity of life itself. And it had all started with a simple meal share between species who had learned to see past their differences to discover their common ground. As Sergeant Park arrived with steaming portions of what he called tactical stew, a high-energy fusion of human and Kytherian ingredients designed specifically for combat planning, Zefak smiled with anticipation. The Devourers had no idea what was coming for them. The Devourer fleet materialized at the edge of Earth's solar system like a malignant tumor spreading across space. 12 massive bioships, each one capable of consuming entire worlds, accompanied by hundreds of smaller vessels that moved with the predatory grace of hunting packs. Admiral Kestiner, the Devourer fleet commander, had expected to find a broken, starving world defended by desperate remnants of coalition forces. Instead, his long-range sensors detected something unprecedented. Energy signatures that suggested unprecedented levels of coordination between human and alien forces, defensive positions that defied conventional military logic, and communication patterns that his analysts couldn't categorize. On Earth's surface, Commander Zefak stood in his transformed command center, surrounded by both human and Kytherian officers whose enhanced capabilities were immediately apparent to anyone who understood military efficiency. The past 72 hours of intensive strategic planning, fueled by increasingly sophisticated fusion cuisine created by the mess hall's collaborative cooking teams, had produced tactical innovations that challenged every assumption about interspecies warfare. Report, tactical, Zefak ordered, his scales now permanently displaying the golden bronze hue that indicated sustained peak performance. Lieutenant Vex, whose own transformation had been remarkable, consulted multiple data streams simultaneously. Commander, enemy forces are deploying in standard Devourer formation, designed to create maximum psychological impact while ensuring efficient resource extraction. They expect us to respond with conventional defensive strategies, which we won't be doing, Zefak replied with satisfaction. Sergeant Park, status on Operation Fusion? Sergeant Park had become something unprecedented in coalition military history. A tactical coordinator whose responsibilities included both combat strategy and nutritional logistics. His innovations in combat-optimized cuisine had proven so effective that similar programs were being established throughout the coalition fleet. Sir, all units have been provided with pre-battle enhancement meals designed for sustained peak performance. Human forces report 60% improvement in reaction times, while our Kytherian troops are showing unprecedented levels of creative tactical thinking. Dr. Chun approached with the latest analysis of what she had termed the culinary combat enhancement effect. Her research had moved far beyond simple nutrition to explore how complex food interactions affected battlefield performance at the neurological level. Commander, the data is extraordinary. Both species are experiencing synergistic effects that go beyond individual enhancement. Mixed units that have been sharing meals show combat coordination levels that exceed what either species achieves independently. General Morrison, who had been coordinating with Earth's remaining defense networks, looked up from her communications console. Zefak, our integrated command structure is performing better than our most optimistic projections. Human intuition enhanced by Kytherian analytical precision is producing strategic insights that neither species could achieve alone. But the true test was about to begin. Admiral Kestiner's fleet was approaching the outer defensive perimeter, expecting to overwhelm demoralized defenders with superior numbers and firepower. The Devourers had conquered dozens of worlds using the same aggressive tactics, and their bioships were specifically designed to induce terror in prey species. All units initiate Operation Fusion, Zefak commanded. What followed challenged every assumption about space warfare that had developed over millennia of galactic conflict. Instead of concentrating forces for maximum defensive efficiency, Earth's defenders scattered into seemingly random patterns that made no tactical sense according to conventional military doctrine. Kytherian warships moved in formations that appeared chaotic, but were actually based on flavor harmony principles that Sergeant Park had learned from human cooking, seemingly disparate elements combining to create effects greater than their individual components. Human vessels used guerrilla tactics inspired by the slow cooking techniques that had taught patience and timing to their crews. Admiral Kesthaner watched the defensive patterns with growing confusion. His tactical computers couldn't predict the enemy movements because they followed no recognizable logic. When his bioships moved to exploit apparent weaknesses in the defensive lines, they found themselves trapped in overlapping fields of fire that materialized seemingly from nowhere. Analysis, he demanded from his subordinates. Admiral, the enemy is using some form of tactical coordination we've never encountered. Their movement patterns suggest they're sharing sensory data in real time across multiple species, but our intercepted communications don't match any known command protocols. What Kesthaner couldn't understand was that Earth's defenders were operating on principles borrowed from collaborative cooking, constant tasting, adjusting, and harmonizing of disparate elements to create unified results. ZFAC's command decisions were influenced by lessons learned from watching Maria Santos balance dozens of ingredients in real time, while human pilots flew attack patterns inspired by the layered complexity of Kytherian fusion dishes. The first engagement proved the effectiveness of these unconventional tactics. A squadron of Devourer interceptors, expecting standard fighter opposition, found themselves facing mixed human Kytherian formations that moved like ingredients in a master chef skillet, appearing to be chaotic but actually following precise timing and temperature control that created perfect results. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hayes, leading a joint fighter squadron, had eaten Sergeant Park's latest creation just hours before launch, a complex fusion dish that combined human chocolate with Kytherian mineral supplements to enhance both reflexes and decision-making speed. Her tactical thinking was operating at levels she had never experienced. Eagle Squadron, implement stir-fry maneuver, she commanded, using the culinary terminology that had become standard for the new tactical approaches. Her mixed squadrons scattered like vegetables hitting a hot pan, then converged on enemy targets with precise timing that created overwhelming local superiority. The Devourer pilots, accustomed to predictable coalition tactics, found themselves outmaneuvered by strategies that followed the rhythms of cooking rather than conventional military theory. Back in the command center, ZFAC monitored multiple engagements while consuming what Sergeant Park called battle broth, a concentrated soup designed to maintain peak cognitive function during extended operations. The soup's complex flavor profile somehow translated into enhanced ability to process multiple data streams simultaneously. Enemy flagship is moving to direct engagement position, reported Lieutenant Vex. Admiral Kesthaner appears frustrated by our unconventional tactics. He should be, ZFAC replied. His forces are designed to counter standard military responses. They have no framework for understanding opponents who treat warfare like collaborative cuisine. Dr. Chin monitored the neurological effects on command staff, her readings showing patterns she had never seen in any species. Commander, your people are achieving collective intelligence levels that shouldn't be possible. It's as if the complex food interactions have enabled a form of distributed thinking. General Morrison coordinated planetary defense batteries that fired in patterns inspired by the layering techniques used in human pastries. Multiple timed explosions that created overlapping effects, much more powerful than simple concentrated fire. ZFAC, this is working better than we hoped. The enemy can't predict our responses because we're not using their logical frameworks. But Admiral Kesthaner was adapting. Devourer tactics emphasized evolutionary responses to unexpected situations, and his bioships began shifting their approach based on observed patterns in the human Kytherian coordination. Admiral, his tactical officer, reported, "We've identified the core of their coordination enhancement. They appear to be using some form of biochemical synchronization that enhances cross-species cooperation. If we can disrupt their supply lines, their enhanced performance should degrade." Kesthaner's mandibles spread in what passed for a smile among his species. Target their logistics networks. Whatever substance they're using to enhance performance, eliminate their access to it. The Devourer counterattack focused on Earth supply convoys, attempting to cut off what they assumed were combat drugs or technological enhancers. But this strategy revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what they faced. When Devourer raiders attacked a convoy carrying supplies to the Denver base, they found themselves capturing ships loaded with what their analysis systems identified as complex organic compounds with no apparent military application. Ingredients for the fusion cuisine that had become the backbone of human Kytherian coordination. The raid's aftermath provided an opportunity that Maria Santos and Sergeant Park had been secretly hoping for. Among the captured Devourer bioships was a wounded enemy officer who required medical treatment. Standard Coalition protocol would have involved interrogation and detention, but ZFAC authorized a different approach. "Bring the prisoner to the mess hall," he ordered, ignoring the shocked expressions of his staff. The captured Devourer, a mid-ranking tactical coordinator named Vortha K, was unlike anything in Earth's experience. His species had evolved as pure predators, their entire culture built around consumption and conquest. Their diet consisted entirely of synthesized proteins optimized for aggressive behavior and rapid healing. When Vortha K regained consciousness in the mess hall, surrounded by the impossible sight of former enemies sharing meals and conversation, his understanding of warfare underwent a fundamental shock. In his experience, conquered species were either consumed or enslaved. The concept of voluntary cooperation between different races was literally incomprehensible. "What is this place?" Vortha K demanded through his translation implant, his predatory instincts triggered by the mingled sense of dozens of complex organic compounds. Maria Santos approached with the same calm confidence she had shown when introducing ZFAC to human cuisine weeks earlier. "This is where we eat together," she said simply. "Would you like to try something?" The question was so far outside Vortha K's conceptual framework that it took several seconds for his translation systems to process it. Devourers took what they wanted by force. The idea of being offered sustenance by an enemy was unprecedented. Sergeant Park brought a carefully prepared bowl of what he called peace soup, a gentle broth designed to be compatible with devourer physiology while introducing completely new sensory experiences. The soup contained compounds that would trigger pleasure responses in devourer neurochemistry while providing nutritional elements their synthesized diet lacked. Vortha K's first taste of the soup triggered reactions that his people had forgotten existed. The complex flavors activated neural pathways that had been dormant since his species had abandoned natural food sources millennia ago. For the first time in his adult life, he experienced satisfaction that wasn't based on domination or consumption of others. As he continued eating, Vortha K found his aggressive impulses gradually diminishing, replaced by curiosity and something he couldn't identify, a desire to understand rather than conquer. The soup's complex chemistry was triggering dormant empathy centers in his brain, capabilities that devourer society had systematically suppressed. "What have you done to me?" he asked, but his tone lacked the threatening edge that typically characterized devourer communication. "We've given you food," ZFAC replied. "Real food, prepared with care and intention. Your people have forgotten what that feels like." Vortha K's next words would echo through galactic history. "Can you teach me to make this myself?" The question marked the beginning of something unprecedented, the first recorded instance of a devourer requesting to learn rather than simply take. As news of Vortha K's transformation spread through hidden channels to other devourer forces, Admiral Kesthaner found himself facing a crisis that no amount of military superiority could resolve. His own troops were becoming curious about this mysterious enhancement that could turn enemies into allies without conquest or subjugation. For a species built entirely on dominance and consumption, the possibility of voluntary cooperation represented a fundamental challenge to their entire worldview. The war was entering a new phase where the outcome would be determined not by weapons or tactics, but by the revolutionary power of a shared meal to transform understanding between species who had never imagined they could be anything other than predator and prey. Admiral Castaner's flagship, the Eternal Hunger, had never experienced anything like the crisis that now threatened to tear apart his fleet from within. For 3 days, reports had been filtering in from across his armada. Crew members questioning orders, requesting information about the enhancement substance that Earth's defenders were using, and, most disturbingly, expressing curiosity about voluntary cooperation with prey species. The transformation of Tactical Coordinator Vorth AK had been broadcast to the entire fleet before Castaner could stop it. His subordinates' request to learn to make this myself had spread through Devourer communication networks like a virus, infecting thousands of minds that had never conceived of creation rather than consumption. In the Denver base mess hall, Vorth AK had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a Devourer chef. Under the patient guidance of Maria Santos and Sergeant Park, he was learning not just to prepare food, but to understand the philosophy behind collaborative cuisine. Each lesson challenged fundamental assumptions about strength, efficiency, and survival that had guided his species for millennia. The key is balance, Maria explained as they prepared what she called reconciliation risotto, a dish designed to be appealing to all 3 species represented in the mess hall. Too much of any single flavor overwhelms the others. True strength comes from harmony, not dominance. Vorth AK's predatory hands, designed for tearing and consuming, moved with surprising delicacy as he learned to stir the rice. His enhanced senses, originally evolved for tracking prey, now detected subtle changes in aroma and texture that told him when each ingredient was perfectly prepared. This process requires patience, he observed, his translation implant struggling with concepts his language had never needed to express. In Devourer culture, we take what we want immediately, but this creates something better by waiting. Sergeant Park nodded approvingly. Cooking teaches delayed gratification and planning ahead. The best dishes require time to develop properly. You can't rush true quality. As Vorth AK stirred the risotto, adding ingredients in carefully timed sequences, his neural patterns were being monitored by Dr. Chen's increasingly sophisticated sensors. The changes were remarkable. Aggression centers in his brain were becoming dormant, while empathy and creativity regions that had been suppressed since childhood were activating. The neurological transformation is accelerating, Dr. Chun reported to Commander Zfak. Vorth AK's brain chemistry is beginning to resemble the enhanced patterns we've seen in human Kytherian teams. But more importantly, he's developing entirely new neural pathways that don't exist in standard Devourer physiology. Zfak watched Vorth AK work with fascination. The former enemy officer was discovering capabilities that his own people had forgotten they possessed. The implications extended far beyond individual transformation. If one Devourer could learn to create rather than consume, perhaps their entire species could be reached. But this possibility terrified Admiral Castaner more than any military threat he had ever faced. Devourer society was built on a rigid hierarchy maintained through controlled aggression and competitive consumption. If his troops began valuing cooperation and creation, the entire structure of his civilization would collapse. Status report on the infected crew members, Castaner demanded from his chief medical officer. Admiral, 17 more personnel have requested permission to attempt communication with the enemy forces. They're showing decreased aggression markers and increased curiosity indicators. I recommend immediate quarantine protocols. But quarantine couldn't stop the spread of ideas. Devourer crew members throughout the fleet were asking questions that had never been posed in their society. What if there are better ways to gain strength than taking it from others? Could cooperation provide advantages that conquest cannot? What are we missing by always being predators and never being partners? On Earth, the impact of these questions was becoming visible in real time. Devourer bioships that had been pressing aggressive attacks began hesitating, their crews requesting clarification of objectives. Some vessels had stopped firing entirely, their commanders requesting communication with the enhancement specialists on Earth's surface. General Morrison monitored these developments with amazement. ZFAC, 3 more Devourer squadrons have requested ceasefire negotiations. They want to send representatives to observe our tactical enhancement protocols. Should we accept? Absolutely, ZFAC replied without hesitation. Prepare additional mess hall facilities. If we're going to transform an entire species, we'll need larger kitchens. The first official Devourer delegation arrived at Denver base under a white flag that neither side had ever expected to see in this war. Led by Sub-Admiral Keth Moore, the group included military observers, scientists, and, most surprisingly, what Devourers called consumption specialists who were responsible for analyzing conquered resources. Keth Moore was a veteran warrior whose predatory instincts were so refined that he could track prey across star systems. But when he entered the mess hall and encountered the mingled aromas of dozens of different fusion dishes, his enhanced senses were overwhelmed by complexity that had no analog in his experience. "What is this place?" he asked, echoing Vorthe K's first question weeks earlier. "This is where we discovered what we were fighting for," ZFAC replied. "Not just survival, but the right to create beauty and share it with others." Maria Santos approached with the confidence that came from having successfully introduced dozens of different species to human cuisine. "Sub-Admiral Keth Moore, welcome to our kitchen. We've prepared a tasting menu designed specifically for Devourer physiology." The meal that followed would later be recorded as the turning point in galactic history. Each dish was designed to trigger dormant neural pathways in Devourer brain chemistry, while demonstrating principles that challenged their fundamental worldview. The first course was a simple soup, but one whose preparation required cooperation between 3 different species. Humans providing intuitive flavor balancing, Kytherians contributing analytical precision, and Vorthe K adding insights into Devourer nutritional needs. The soup couldn't have been created by any single species working alone. When Keth Moore tasted it, his reaction was immediate and profound. His predatory senses, designed to evaluate potential prey, instead detected the care and intention that had gone into the dish's creation. For the first time in his adult life, he was experiencing sustenance that strengthened him without requiring the defeat of others. "This provides energy without conquest," he observed, his translation systems struggling with the concept. "How is this possible?" Sergeant Park, now recognized as Earth's leading expert in interspecies culinary diplomacy, explained, "When you create instead of taking, you add value to the universe rather than depleting it. The energy you gain is multiplied because it's freely given rather than forcibly taken." The second course pushed Keth Moore's understanding even further. It was a complex dish that required precise timing and coordination. Ingredients that were added too early would be destroyed, while those added too late wouldn't integrate properly. Success demanded patience, planning, and trust in the process. As Keth Moore consumed the dish, he realized he was experiencing something his people had lost millennia ago: satisfaction that came from creation rather than destruction. The complex flavors triggered memories that seemed to come from genetic depths, echoes of a time when his ancestors had built rather than consumed. "We were not always predators," he said quietly, and the statement rippled through the Devourer delegation like a seismic shock. Dr. Chun monitored the neurological changes in real time, her readings showing transformations that challenged everything galactic science understood about species-specific brain development. "The dormant neural pathways aren't just activating," she reported. "They're evolving, developing new connections that didn't exist in baseline Devourer physiology." By the time the meal concluded with a dessert that required collaborative preparation from all 3 species, Keth Moore had undergone a transformation that his own medical officers couldn't explain. His aggression markers had dropped to levels that should have been incompatible with Devourer survival, yet his cognitive function and physical capabilities were actually enhanced. I request permission to learn these techniques, Keth Moore announced formally. Not for military advantage, but for understanding. General Morrison looked at ZFAC with amazement. 3 months ago, we were preparing for humanity's extinction. Now we're teaching former enemies how to cook. How did this happen? It started with curiosity, ZFAC replied, remembering his own first taste of human cuisine. And it grew because we discovered that sharing something beautiful creates more beauty than consuming something powerful. The news of Keth Moore's transformation reached Admiral Castaner within hours, carried by communication networks that he could no longer control. Across his fleet, crew members were openly questioning the fundamental principles of Devourer civilization. Some bio ships had completely ceased hostile operations, their crews requesting transfer to cultural exchange programs on Earth's surface. Faced with the collapse of everything he had believed in, Castaner made a desperate decision. He would personally lead an assault on Earth's surface to destroy the source of this contamination before it spread beyond his fleet to the broader Devourer Empire. But as his personal transport approached Denver base, Castaner found himself confronted by an impossible sight: Devourer personnel working alongside humans and Kytherians to prepare defensive positions. His own officers, supposedly infected by enemy influence, were using their predatory skills not to hunt, but to protect. Vorth AK met his former admiral's transport personally, but he was no longer the tactical coordinator who had left the flagship weeks earlier. His movements showed none of the aggressive tension that characterized Devourer military bearing. Instead, he displayed a calm confidence that spoke of inner strength rather than dominance over others. Admiral Castaner, Vorth said, using formal protocols but with underlying warmth that Devourer language had never accommodated. I invite you to join us for a meal. The invitation was so far beyond Castaner's conceptual framework that he couldn't process it as a military communication. Devourers didn't invite, they demanded, took, or conquered. The very existence of voluntary offering challenged the foundation of his reality. What have they done to you? Castaner asked, his predatory instincts searching for signs of coercion or control. They taught me that strength can be shared instead of hoarded, Vorth AK replied. Admiral, the power we've been seeking through conquest has been available through cooperation all along. We just never learned to access it. The final meal of the war took place in the expanded mess hall that now accommodated hundreds of personnel from 3 species. Admiral Castaner sat at a table, surrounded by beings who should have been his enemies or his prey, sharing food that no devourer had ever imagined could exist. Maria Santos prepared the meal herself, a fusion dish that represented the culmination of everything she had learned about interspecies harmony. Every ingredient had been chosen not just for nutritional value, but for symbolic significance. Human grains representing patience and growth, Kytherian minerals symbolizing structure and precision, and Devourer protein sources transformed through cooking into something that strengthened without requiring others to weaken. When Castaner took his first bite, the transformation that followed was visible to every being in the room. His predatory features softened as dormant neural pathways activated. His aggressive posture relaxed as stress hormones were replaced by satisfaction compounds, and his eyes lost the calculating hardness that had characterized every devourer leader for millennia. "This is what we lost," he whispered, and his words carried the weight of species-wide recognition. "When we chose conquest over creation, we traded our birthright for temporary power. The war ended not with surrender or victory, but with understanding." Within days, the entire Devourer fleet had requested permission to establish cultural exchange programs. Admiral Castaner formally disbanded his armada, transforming it into the galaxy's first interspecies culinary academy. The change spread rapidly through Devourer space as returning personnel carried both recipes and revolutionary ideas back to their homeworlds. Planets that had been stripped bare by aggressive consumption began to flourish as former predators learned to cultivate and create. Dr. Chen's research eventually proved that the complex compounds in properly prepared food had triggered evolutionary changes that had been suppressed by synthetic nutrition for thousands of years. All three species possessed latent capabilities for enhanced cooperation, creativity, and empathy, qualities that only emerged when their neural chemistry was supported by the full spectrum of natural nutritional complexity. Commander Zefak, now appointed as the first director of the Galactic Culinary Alliance, stood in his transformed command center watching ships from dozens of species arrive to learn the principles of collaborative cuisine. The war against the Devourers had become a galaxy-wide renaissance of cooperation and creativity. Commander, Lieutenant Vex reported, his scales now permanently displaying the warm bronze that indicated sustained peak performance. We have confirmation that 17 former Devourer worlds have established fusion cuisine academies. Food production is up 400%, and aggressive incidents have dropped to near zero. Sergeant Park, now holding the newly created rank of Culinary General, approached with the evening's menu. Sir, tonight we're hosting delegations from 12 different species, including 3 that were previously unknown to the Coalition. They've all requested instruction in collaborative cooking techniques. But the true measure of their success came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos approached with a communication from the furthest reaches of the galaxy, former Devourer territories that had been considered permanently lost to aggressive consumption. Zefak, you need to hear this, she said, activating a holographic message from a world that had been barren for centuries. The image showed vast gardens where nothing had grown for generations, tended by former Devourers whose predatory skills had been transformed into nurturing capabilities. Children of multiple species played among fruit trees that their ancestors had never imagined could coexist. This is Administrator Vorthke, came the familiar voice of their first transformed Devourer, reporting from New Harmony Colony. We have achieved sustainable food production for a population of 50,000 beings representing 14 different species. More importantly, we have achieved something our ancestors thought was impossible. We have learned to create more than we consume. As Zefak watched the images of former enemies working together to build rather than destroy, he reflected on the remarkable chain of events that had begun with his reluctant acceptance of human hospitality weeks earlier. A simple meal had revealed that the galaxy's greatest challenges couldn't be solved through superior weapons or tactics, but through the revolutionary power of sharing beauty and nourishment with those we had never imagined could be our friends. The mess hall around him filled with the sounds of dozens of languages as beings from across the galaxy gathered for the evening meal. Former enemies sat side by side, sharing recipes and stories while their children played together in ways their parents had never dreamed possible. The war was over, but something far greater had begun. A galactic civilization built not on conquest and consumption, but on the radical idea that true strength came from lifting others up rather than pushing them down. And it all started with the transformative realization that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the universe is a perfectly prepared meal shared with an open heart.